Every time you ask a chatbot a question, generate an image, or watch an AI video, somewhere in the physical world, a machine is burning an enormous amount of electricity to make that happen. By 2026, the data centers running artificial intelligence are projected to consume more electricity than entire countries the size of Japan. While everyone argues about which model is smartest, the real transformation is happening somewhere almost nobody looks, in power lines, transformers, and concrete buildings of machines that never sleep. By the end of this video, you'll understand why, in 2026, the smartest people in this industry stopped arguing about which AI model is best. Artificial intelligence is no longer just code. It's land, electricity, cooling systems, and hundreds of billions of dollars in physical construction. Once you understand this foundation, you start seeing the entire industry differently, where the actual bottlenecks are, where the real leverage sits, and why some decisions made this year will shape what's even possible for the next decade. This isn't a story about chips or chatbots. It's a story about concrete, copper, and electricity, and why that story matters more than almost anyone realizes. Let's start with scale most people have never heard out loud. In 2024, data centers worldwide used about 415 terawatt hours of electricity, roughly 1.5% of all power consumed on the planet. By the end of 2026, the International Energy Agency expects that number to cross 1,000 terawatt hours. That's roughly the same amount of electricity Japan uses to run an entire country for a year. The part of that demand driven specifically by AI is growing at around 30% a year, 4 times faster than data center electricity use as a whole. In the state of Virginia, data centers already consume 26% of all electricity used statewide. In Ireland, it's 21%, projected to hit 32% within this year. These aren't small numbers buried in a footnote. They are starting to show up as a measurable share of how entire regions use power. And the demand keeps climbing faster than anyone expected even 2 years ago. Now look at who's paying for all of this. In 2026, the 4 largest American technology companies, Microsoft, Amazon, Alphabet, and Meta, are expected to spend close to $700 billion combined on capital expenditure. That's nearly double what they spent just 1 year earlier. Most of that money isn't going toward writing smarter software. It's going into physical construction. Data center campuses, cooling systems, backup power, and the equipment needed to connect all of it to the electrical grid. Meta alone raised its spending guidance to as much as $145 billion for this year, citing rising costs for components and data centers. Microsoft's finance chief said the company expects to remain capacity constrained through at least the end of 2026, even after spending nearly $200 billion. This is no longer a story about software companies. These are now some of the largest physical construction operations on the planet. And the bottleneck they keep running into isn't a shortage of ideas. It's a shortage of concrete, copper, and electrons. Here's the part of this story almost nobody saw coming 2 years ago. The hardest thing to get in 2026 for an AI data center isn't a powerful chip. It's a transformer. The large piece of electrical equipment that steps high voltage power down to something a building can actually use. Lead times for these transformers now stretch up to 4 years, according to industry analysts. Nearly half of all data center projects announced for 2026 remain stuck in the planning phase, unable to start construction, simply because the electrical equipment to power them doesn't exist yet. One research firm tracked roughly 11 gigawatts of announced data center capacity for this year that still has no construction underway at all. Companies that secured access to power years in advance now hold an advantage that money alone can't buy back. Access to electricity has become as important as access to the chips themselves. This is the quiet, unglamorous constraint actually deciding who wins and who waits in this industry right now.
Faced with years-long waits for grid connections, some of the largest companies in the world made an unusual decision. They stopped waiting for the electrical grid and started generating their own power on site. Industry insiders now call this strategy "bring your own power." One fuel cell company built specifically for this purpose reported revenue above $2 billion in 2025, up nearly 40% from the year before, driven almost entirely by data center customers. One major cloud provider shifted an entire data center project away from traditional gas turbines toward these on-site fuel cells, after running into the same equipment shortages everyone else is facing. An investment firm even created a fund worth up to $5 billion specifically to finance more of these on-site power projects.
None of this happened because it was the cheapest option. It happened because waiting in line for the traditional grid had become slower than building your own miniature power plant from scratch. All of these numbers eventually land somewhere very specific: a household electricity bill. In several states, utility regulators have publicly confirmed that data centers are now a primary driver behind rising electricity rates. In one city, a consumer watchdog group estimated that local utility bills could climb by as much as $70 a month because of nearby data center demand. At public town halls across the country, residents have been showing up by the hundreds to confront local officials. One resident put it simply: "I don't know that this facility will benefit me in any way." Another described the constant low hum of machinery near their home as something they now hear, quote, "at all hours of evening and night." Between March and June of 2025 alone, community opposition blocked or delayed close to $98 billion worth of data center projects nationwide. By early 2026, electricity costs and data centers had become a leading issue heading into the midterm elections.
This is no longer an abstract debate about technology. For a growing number of Americans, it's a debate about their monthly bill and what's humming a few hundred yards from their backyard. So why does almost nobody talk about any of this? Because a new chatbot feature is exciting. A new transformer substation is not. Headlines are built for moments, for launches, for demos. The physical build-out behind those moments takes years and looks the same boring way every single day, until suddenly it's the reason an entire project gets delayed by 24 months. It's easy to get excited about what artificial intelligence can say. It's much harder and much more important to understand what has to physically exist before it can say anything at all. The companies actually running this industry understand that difference completely. That's why their spending tells a very different story than their marketing does. Not everyone agrees on what happens next, and it's worth hearing both sides honestly. Some analysts argue there is no real shortage of equipment at all, and that the bottleneck is outdated purchasing processes inside utility companies, not a lack of factory capacity.
Other engineering firms insist the shortage is structural. Raw materials, manufacturing capacity, and permitting simply cannot be expanded fast enough to match demand.
What both sides agree on is this: the timeline for building physical power infrastructure is now the single biggest variable in how fast artificial intelligence can scale. Not chip design, not model architecture, concrete, copper, and the electrical grid. Whichever side turns out to be right, the practical result for 2026 is the same: a long line of finished, funded projects sitting and waiting for power. Step back, and a pattern becomes obvious. Every major technological shift in history eventually ran into the same wall. The physical world doesn't scale at the speed of software. Railroads needed track laid mile by mile. The electric grid itself took decades to reach every household. Artificial intelligence is now hitting that exact same wall, just faster and more visibly than anything before it. The models can improve overnight. The substation that powers them takes years to build, no matter how much money gets thrown at it. Understanding this single fact changes how an entire industry should be read. Progress in AI isn't only measured in smarter answers, it's measured in gigawatts that actually exist, and gigawatts still stuck in a permitting queue somewhere. If you're young and you keep hearing that artificial intelligence will define your career, here's the part nobody mentions. The skills in highest demand over the next decade won't only be about prompting a model or building an app. Electrical engineers, grid technicians, energy project managers, and people who understand how to permit and build physical infrastructure are becoming some of the most sought-after professionals in the entire AI economy. While millions of people compete to learn the same software skills everyone else is learning, almost nobody is racing to understand the physical layer that makes all of it possible. Sometimes the most overlooked path is the one standing right in front of everyone, just wearing a hard hat instead of headphones. If you've spent decades watching technology cycles come and go, this one will feel familiar in one specific way. Every previous boom, railroads, electricity, telecommunications, the internet, looked unstoppable from the outside, right up until its physical limits forced a painful, expensive correction. Nobody ever explained it to you this plainly before. The companies spending the most confidently in public are also the ones quietly racing to lock down physical power years ahead of everyone else. That isn't blind faith. It's preparation for a constraint they already see coming.
You don't need to predict the future of artificial intelligence to understand this pattern. You've already lived through versions of it.
Here's the hardest truth to sit with about 2026. The system isn't broken. It's behaving exactly the way physical systems always behave when demand outruns infrastructure. Electricity bills aren't rising by accident. They're rising because something enormous is being built faster than the grid was ever designed to support. Companies aren't building their own power plants because it's elegant. They're doing it because waiting in line stopped being an option. Communities aren't showing up at town halls because they hate technology. They're showing up because a hum outside their window and a line item on their bill became impossible to ignore. All of these things are true at the same time. None of them contradict each other. The people who understand this stop asking only, what can AI do? They start asking, what does it actually take, physically, for AI to keep doing it? That single shift in the question changes how the entire next decade of this technology should be read. When you close this video, the transformers will still be on backorder, the data centers will still be under construction, and the electricity bills will still be climbing in the towns built closest to them. Nothing here changes overnight.
But something can change in how you read every headline about artificial intelligence from now on. Behind every claim about a smarter model is a quieter, slower story about concrete, copper, and the people fighting over who gets to use the power grid first. The flashy layer gets the headlines. The physical layer decides what's actually possible. Pay attention to the boring infrastructure, and the parts of this story that look like chaos start turning into something you can actually read.